welcome to MySecurityTV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. My name's Chris Covage, I'm the editor with MySecurity Media, and this is our Friday morning episode. This morning we're going to be joined by Lani Refiti, who is the Regional Director with Claroty, and we're going to be talking about IoT and OT security vulnerabilities and some of the recent research that Claroty has been doing. And without further ado, I'm going to bring on Lani Refiti, the Regional Director with Claroty up there in sunny Queensland. Lani, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Chris, and thanks for inviting me on. I'm an avid follower of the show, and I think the more interesting topic is the one you've got to follow with the Chauvin trial. I'll make sure to watch it. That'll be really interesting.
Yeah, and no offense, a few people have said that. Oh, that might be interesting as well. So, but look, you can't get past IoT security in our industrial revolution that we are, 4.0. And Claroty, and this interview's kind of come around with Claroty. I'll get regular sort of media releases from Claroty on their recent research and the like. And there's a range of vulnerabilities, and they're always in that OT sort of space. Maybe let's start with your role as regional director. You're kind of new in the seat there, and Claroty is also a very specialised sort of cybersecurity company as well. So, Lani, your new role as regional director with Claroty and how you're enjoying it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, look, newish role since the beginning of this year, running the Claroty business here in Australia and New Zealand. So we are a startup that came out of Israel and now headquartered in the US, and we've been in the ANZ region for the last few years. We're a small team of about 11 people here, with a few more to come, and that's across the range of customer-facing channels development, as well as professional services engineers, support engineers as well on both the east and west coast. And like you said, our focus is purely on the industrial space. So industries that are heavily reliant on operational technology, industrial control systems, and the sort of the emerging industrial IoT movement, right? And that convergence of the traditional IT environments and OT, which is happening, albeit probably not as fast as the Gartners and McKinseys of the world would like you to believe, but it is occurring, especially in the data space, where a lot of organizations are looking to match their historian data, which usually sits within OT environments, with on Azure or on GCP, etc.
And I suppose that is one of the key ones that I'd like to touch on, is that cloud computing and the analytics that are going on in sort of cloud environments, but they are actually feeding data from operational technology and the like. How advanced do you think it is? Do you think it's happening in pockets or industry sectors? What's your observations in that?
Yeah, good point there. Industry sectors, I think the power and the water sector, manufacturing sectors are probably the most mature in that aspect of that. It's a marketing term, but we all use it in terms of that convergence, right? And what you mentioned around analytics, that's where it's beginning, the data. So, and most of the platforms, customers aren't building in their data centers. They're now using, the off-the-shelf, from Azure or GCP or AWS. And what's happening is that you're right, they're dragging or pulling data from their OT networks, but it is at the top level of the OT network. So if you look at your operational technology network and break it down using the Purdue model, which is sort of the logical communication representation for OT networks that is most popularly used. Think of it as like the OSI stack for corporate IT. The top layer of the Purdue model, level 4 or up to level 5, is that corporate IT. So usually they pull the data from lower level historian or etc. databases, and then they move that data into their corporate IT, into the cloud. So it's still done in a segmented fashion, secure, if you want to call it that fashion. But that's where it's starting. And obviously, as industrial IoT takes hold and continues, you will see a lot more communication into your OT networks that sort of break that Purdue model and either come in directly or into certain layers of that model.
It's making sure that it's at, what's the term, omnidirectional, so it's that data only coming out, there's no data going in or accessing in, and that's kind of the key aspect.
Correct.
maybe talk us through some of the vulnerabilities that have come out, and there's quite a few actually. I just do a Claroty search in my email, and all of the releases come up, and you've got a good PR team, I'll give you that much, in terms of just pumping out. So we've had a Schneider electric smart meter exploit or vulnerability, Rockwell's FactoryTalk asset center, Ovarro TBox remote terminal units, and then generally just the OPC, and OPC's open something communications?
Platform communication, open platform communication. So it's it's a library protocol that sort of that takes, if you look at sort of proprietary devices, let's say a Rockwell automations pump connected to a Schneider electric sensor, so to speak. It takes those two proprietary protocols and allows communication between both, and then upstream to your HMI, which is a human machine interface.
Yeah.
So it's the glue that sort of holds all that together. And then the thing with OPC is that it's widely used, and often companies will build their libraries into third-party products. And so you might have a Rockwell Automations PLC, but part of that will be that OPC stack. So the challenge with that, it makes it a little bit harder to update in terms of patching it, or if there's a firmware vulnerability, etc.
And the other one is that remote access to PLCs as well that are coming through. What are you seeing sort of front line there in terms of PLCs and new PLCs coming to market? Do they have new security features, things like mandatory password change from the default and that type of thing?
They are starting to, yeah. But the challenge with a lot of these PLCs is their lifespan, right? They're 10 years, sometimes more in terms of, and the PLCs these days, which is a programmable logic card, it's what programs the actual pumps, the sensors, etc., the physical layer. The challenge with PLCs these days is they're becoming much more modular. So traditionally, PLCs will communicate in very specific protocols, non-TCP/IP, non-Ethernet type protocols, right? Like Modbus, DNP3, Profibus, right? Which is makes it harder for an attacker to navigate, because you require sort of specialized knowledge of it. But PLCs these days are becoming modular, so it's not uncommon for a PLC to have 3 or 4 modules in their rack slot, and one of those modules being an Ethernet slot, which communicates over TCP, right? So it makes it easier, makes it more visible on networks, etc. So they are doing more things. Like I've seen some PLCs that are connected to HMIs that have a web interface, right? And they're exposed to the internet. It's like, whoa, goodness, and these things control, pumps at, sewage, water plants, etc. So, and a lot of these organizations have long relied on security by obscurity, in terms of they're not going to find it. But if you've used if you've got cursory sort of skills in Shodan, you'll find it. Someone will find it.
And Shodan, we had Cato Networks sort of highlighted Shodan, and something again Dan Einreich raises as well is Shodan. I haven't played a lot in Shodan. I'm almost scared of what I'm going to find, but it's on my to-do list just recently. But even sort of I'm in an apartment building, and just getting a sense of what might be in a building. So it's on one of those things in terms of time, making the time for research. But anyone listening, check out the Shodan site and start playing around with that and seeing what you can come up with. It's a good way to do your own vulnerability assessments as well. Maybe the contrast with physical security too, Lani, in terms of the IT-OT mix and the importance of physical security. Do you think that's underrated or underappreciated at times, or do you think it is a dominant part of OT security?
Again, it depends on industry verticals, and it depends on clients, right? And I'll give an example. In the building space, the smart buildings, etc. Some buildings are extremely porous in terms of, we in a previous life we would do like a cybersecurity audit or some sort of red teaming exercise on a building, and it would be really easy just to walk into the server room, right, rather than trying to entry point via wireless or entry point via a digital wayfinder, etc. You just buy yourself a high-vis shirt and try and walk straight into the server room, and you can connect straight into the the aggregation switch. So yeah, the physical security in some industries, particularly in the building space, is still very porous. And as I said, it makes a a complete mockery of the whole security model.
Look,
But
it
in
absolutely
some,
does.
in some,
Sorry, go.
yeah, I was going to say, but in some organisations, like we a couple of years ago, we ran a red teaming exercise for a power distribution company, and it took a lot of work to finally get into the control room, and a couple of our people were actually pulled up, and police called. In our attempts to try and get in there. So in those kind of industries, regulated industries, physical security is taken very seriously, obviously.
Yeah, I was going to say, I absolutely agree. I do probably more building security related work, and the comms rooms are often unlocked. The racks are open, they're not locked, apart from the cabling. Great. That's the only sort of security aspect that they have, is the cabling's a complete mess, so you wouldn't know where to start in the first place.
Yeah,
but from a wireless aspect, yeah, and as you say, the critical infrastructure, that does bring us to critical infrastructure and what's happening here in Australia at least, but elsewhere. This has happened in Singapore, and I know Claroty's up in Singapore as well. You've got an office up there, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that's where our Asia Pacific headquarters are based.
Yeah, so critical infrastructure, what are you seeing in terms of what's happening here in Australia in terms of critical infrastructure under the new Australian cybersecurity strategy and what's being rolled out from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre and ASD? There's a program now on sort of auditing and reviewing critical infrastructure cybersecurity.
Yes, yeah. Well, the actual act, which is the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act, is being amended at the moment. It's going through their their co-design process, which is actually, it's been pretty good. I mean, I went through the APRA sort of cybersecurity act, the AEMO one for energy, power, etc. This is good in terms of the collaboration and consultation that they've had with industry. I mean, you'll still get people complaining that they didn't listen, or they didn't do this, didn't do that, but the process they went through and the iterations that they came back through clearly showed that they were listening. And yeah, so the act itself is being amended, and the good thing is that it puts a lot more onus on operators of those assets, etc., to ensure that they have a good security posture. They have a that's provable via audits, etc., expanding the scope of what's actually covered. So what I'm seeing from customers in critical infrastructure is a lot more work going into cyber in terms of and good work in the sense that it's not just going out and buying something like Claroty to tick a box, right? It's actually a programmatic, based on, if they're power, they're usually looking at the AES CSF, which is the cybersecurity framework from the regulator AEMO. If they're water, they're usually relying on a more of an industry standard, but they're actually following a programmatic step, looking at their governance, risk processes first, and then ending up with technology to sort of mitigate some of those risks.
What do you, how do you approach an audit or an assessment? Do you look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework? Do you work to a particular standard? What's your preferred sort of standard that you would work to?
Yeah, and again, it's industry specific, and there's a number of really good broad standards as well. The NIST standard is very good. If it's in power, generation, transmission, distribution, then the default is AEMO as a regulator, their new standard that they've released. If not, as I said, NIST, IEC 62443 is another good one to use. And as a former consultant in my consulting, a good framework is always of good use, kind of thing. So I would always rely on one of those.
Nice. Now, maybe just talk us as we finish off, and Jude will join us very shortly. Recent research that Claroty has come through, you've been briefed by your analyst team. What's some of the recent findings that you've had, and maybe some call to actions for those involved?
But probably the most severe one, and I should take care when I talk about it, because a lot of these are with our partners and investors, right?
Fair enough.
So, and these are, and what I'll say is these are public, right? So we've worked, typical research. We've worked with the manufacturer in terms of disclosing up front first, and worked with them to actually write patches, etc., for that. And then when they're happy with it, then we've released disclosure. So responsible disclosure at all times. Probably the one that sort of took my attention was the Rockwell Automation's FactoryTalk Asset Center one.
Yeah.
And the reason being is that if you know anything about OT environments, Rockwell Automation is probably one of the two big manufacturers globally, along with Honeywell. And this solution that they've got is basically, think of it as the brains of an OT system, right? What it does is it oversees the backup and disaster recovery services, version controls, source controls, asset inventory, etc., of an OT environment. So it's the brains. It's got everything, right? It allows you to do what we call project file backup. So a PLC or an RTU will have backup files you need in order to reflash firmware or bring it back up if it's corrupted, etc. So 9 vulnerabilities. Our research team found 9 vulnerabilities in this solution, which if exploited could give you access to the entire facility, factory, whatever it was that this was controlling. And the big thing about this was a potential exploit of it. Again, if we use the Purdue model, and the way customers usually use the Purdue model is that every layer is segmented, is completely segmented off from the next layer. And some of the layers, depending on the industries, will use things like data diodes, which force or guarantee one-way communication. So hard segmentation of each layer. But if you were able to exploit one of these 9 exploits on this specific solution from Rockwell, it basically broke the security model, because this asset center had access to the different layers of the Purdue model. So it was quite alarming. But again, responsible disclosure, Rockwell were able to quickly release patches for that before we disclose the vulnerabilities. But yeah, that probably over the last 6 months of the many that we've sort of disclosed, that probably was the big one.
Yeah, and that affects FactoryTalk Asset Center version 10 and earlier. I've just put the link out on at least YouTube and a few of the Facebook channels. That's on our Cyber Risk Leaders website, that particular release, and that's CVEs 27462 and in that range. So again, as Lani mentioned, there's 9, and I suppose the research process that's kind of the fun part. Have you done that part in terms of they basically get these units and the like, and then break them and just attack them, really? But to get 9, and they've termed them as a class of bugs that occur when an attacker is able to inject malicious code into a serialized object that would be executed later when being deserialized. So I suppose once they're in, then they can sort of see what other vulnerabilities are there, and then really go through that process. The really dangerous ones are the ones where they can remote exploit or remote exploitation of code. A lot of the vulnerabilities you see will allow an attacker to maybe restart the device or launch some sort of denial of service, which for critical infrastructure is disastrous, could be disastrous, right? But this particular one, allows a user to remotely execute code on the device, which means, as you said, right, it allows to give them control and potentially move laterally in the environment, maintain persistence, maybe even delete logs, etc., to obfuscate what they're doing. Okay, well, look, maybe to finish off the risk assessment, and we're obviously talking industry specific as well. But how serious do you think this can get? We've had recently, I think, a hospital got breached and resulted in the death of somebody, and so cyber incidents do have impacts on physical safety. And some of the key sort of events that have been happening recently, the Florida water system or water treatment plant was the most recent one. But there's been some others in terms of the attack in Israel just recently, although that was an explosion, but still we're classing that as a cyber attack. How common do you think these are, and then the risk profile of OT security, and maybe what our expectations should be into the future with critical infrastructure and the vulnerabilities there?
Yeah, look, that's an interesting discussion, right? Because I after being in the industry for 24 years in terms of security, I think we need to not go into hype and marketing around these things, and sort of give a factual sort of response. And if you look at it, attacks in OT and attacks in critical infrastructure are still rare, right? Compared to what's happening in IT, they are rare. But the challenge is they call them like black swan events, where it has low frequency, but very high impact. Because they are critical infrastructure, they have very high impact. So, which is probably why you see so much in the news when, as you said, the Florida water plant, Oldsmar attack, etc. Again, you don't hear that very often. You don't hear about it in Australia, etc. But one sort of incident could have disastrous sort of effects. So
I suppose
it is a high risk. Yeah.
Yeah, but it comes back. Do you think it then starts to play into national security, particularly when we have a heightened geopolitical situation and we're dealing with nation-state actors? That's where the game changes a little bit. And
exactly. So when you do it,
go, Lani.
When you do a typical risk assessment, right, all those factors go into to tell whether you have a heightened sense of risk, etc. And you're exactly right. The fact that there is a big geopolitical play, and we are right sort of on the edges of it here in Australia, and our big neighbour to in Southeast Asia, etc. That sort of heightens it, and I think those factors, not the fact that it's frequently happening and etc., but those factors make it an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, the other one I had, I've just lost it, but maybe just to close. What does Claroty actually do? And no need for a sales pitch, but what's the although if you're trained enough, go for it. But what's maybe just close off on what Claroty actually does or is, and other than the services.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'll put a QR code up on the screen. I take credit card as well. So, no, look, Claroty is an industrial cybersecurity company. We don't do anything else. We only work in industries that are heavy reliance on OT, industrial computer systems. We provide a few solutions to detect potential anomalies and attackers in your environment. Provide that secure remote connection, and also soon to come, more of an endpoint-based, if you want to call it that, solution that sits on engineering workstations and detects, what's happening around them as well. So we're purely OT, don't do anything else, and also obviously moving into the new industrial IoT as it comes on more and more.
Nice. Well, you've got a big surface or landscape to cover, so very interesting as well. And I imagine you're national here in Australia. You mentioned you've got 11 people. Are you spread everywhere or just East Coast?
Yes. Yeah. No, East and West Coast. Probably the bulk in the West Coast.
Oh, in the West Coast, in Perth?
Yes, in WA.
Nice. Okay. Well, that's the IoT state considered with their mining and resources. So very good. Well, look, Lani Refiti, the Regional Director with Claroty, thank you very much for this morning. And this will go out as a podcast as well, given it's on cybersecurity and OT. So thank you, Lani. I'll let you go and enjoy your day. And
thanks, Chris.
Pleasure having you on. And we'll have you on again later in the year.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Good man. Thank you. I'll let you go. And I'll put you backstage. Thanks, Lani. Okay, very interesting. And again, I've mentioned our SCADA, without me sounding like I'm doing a sales pitch, but our SCADA and ICS cybersecurity course with Daniel Ehrenreich is available on learnsecurity.mysecuritymarketplace.com, so you can check that out. As I do, I'll close off with the report of the day, and the Robert Half, their salary guide 2021 just came out, and really showing now 79% of Australian leaders say hybrid workforces are comprised of employees working remotely in an office, and now a permanent part of the employment landscape. We kind of knew that already, but it's getting locked down in terms of these reports and studies. Remuneration trends. Employers still plan to award salary increases. This is probably a good thing. That's 31% yes for all employees in terms of do you plan to increase salaries for existing employees in 2021. The average salary increase company leaders plan to give in 2021 is 6%. So that's not too bad. And yes, but only for top performers is 38%. So you've got at least nearly 70% there in terms of a raise for all employees or for top performers. And no, was it 22% were no, and then 9%. So about 30% is either a no or not sure. So if you're working for one of those employers, you're not getting a raise. And in terms of in-demand technical skills, and this is available obviously on the MySecurity Marketplace, so you can check this out for a download. But the in-demand, the top one there is software and web development, and then business intelligence and reporting, And then in-demand soft skills, logical problem solving and communication skills and innovative thinking. New Zealand, top 5 permanent roles, software developer, tester and product manager. And top 5 contract roles, software developer, tester and systems engineer. And then in Australia, we've got help desk support officer is the top 5, then systems and security engineers, and then the top 5 contract roles, help desk support officers. I think it's probably because they're bringing all the help desk back to Australia for a bit of a sovereignty play, and then the systems engineer and software developers. So if you are a software developer, you are in hot demand according to the Robert Half Salary Guide 2021. You should probably be asking for a pay rise. Please check out the Cyber Risk Leaders magazine and our Cyber War series. And now that's it from us for a couple of weeks. I'm going to take a few weeks break. We might do the odd interview, and we do have some other podcasts and MySecTV interviews coming through, but they won't be live. So in terms of the live streaming, I may stream from Perth. I'm off to WA for a good couple of weeks, and we'll see how we go. But certainly next week we're going to take a break. We'll be back to live streaming in late May. So thank you very much for joining us on our Tech and Sec Weekly Friday morning episode, and enjoy your Friday and your weekend.